And I spent like 2 hours on my hair this morning. I thought, everybody's going to see my face.
We can use your picture as the clip art for the episode.
I finally got my eyebrows just right.
Most unlikely of villains, just moves of brain and more pause. Does it talk? Does it know how? Does it bottle? Does it meow? In the lair of the cerebral bore, and I'll show him so much more. We'll leave your brains at the door.
Welcome back to Cerebrivore. I'm your host, Jason. I do the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. I have an esteemed panel today, but let me take you back in time to last episode. The last 3 episodes have been recasts of Safer Fantasy Crafting's time travel episodes, talk about time travel and role-playing games. And if you remember, at the end of the last episode, we heard this.
Leave anything for us?
Just bodies.
I'd just like you to start off your unit again.
Safer.
All it would take is you're coming back.
This was the last time.
Until the next time.
And here we are the next time. So I'm going to introduce the panel and we will get going. First off, we have Safer, podcaster and game philosopher, the RPG community's Marshall McLuhan. How are you doing today, Safer?
Thank you for that, Jason. I did prefer field chemist and recovered alcoholic. I think that's more accurate. It makes me sound like an Electric Bastion Land pre-generated character, but thank you for that. I'll take philosopher. Thank you. Yes. I'm very well, Jason. Very happy to be here. Very kind of you to invite me.
I'm glad for you to come. We need you to lead the team here. Next up, I'll go ahead and do reverse order. So we'll use everybody's superhero names. We have Runeslinger, aka Anthony, who's a content creator and game editor. How are you doing today, Anthony?
I'm doing all right. My day is winding to a close because I'm broadcasting from the future.
That's right. Yeah. So we have a worldwide panel here. We have folks from as far away. Well, I'm in Virginia, USA, but we have folks as far as South Korea and everywhere in between. So excellent. Next up, we have JD Sterling, author and game designer. How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing pretty all right. Got myself up good and early this morning, and I've got plenty of coffee. So I'm ready to zip around for some time travel. That's for certain.
Excellent. Yes, coffee is very important.
That's why I was named Joe. The coffee. We need each other.
Yes. Meant to be. Next, we have Free Thrall, also known as Spencer, of the Keep Off the Borderland podcast, and a game designer and game collaborator in his own right.
Thank you. Hi. I'm happy to accept that title as long as nobody looks up what I've claimed to have created.
Arceus is a great game. I don't know why you're saying that. It's actually
yes, but to say I created any of it is kind of it's just stolen little bits from other places.
Nah, you're too modest, my friend. Last up, we have Barney Dicker, Local Ludus podcast, who's also podcaster and game designer, and most importantly, the various games he's designed, and most important to this topic is the League of Eternal Guardians. How are we doing, Barney?
Hey, yeah, good. Yeah, I'm hoping that taking part in this panel will get me back to actually putting an episode or 2 out myself. Thanks.
No, I wouldn't think about doing it without you. In fact,
I mean, to have the chance to talk to you, Jason, it's been such a long time. It's a pleasure. A pleasure.
It is. It's great to have you on here, Barney. And actually, we're going to throw you the first question.
Okay.
You've run, so League of Eternal Guardians is a time travel game, and in some way, right? Have you ever experienced in that game or in any other game problems with players that have they don't want to play in historical settings because they're worried they don't know enough about the setting. They're worried they have to research the setting, or they're worried about maybe the homework involved in a real world historical setting.
The only person I can think of is me. I I love the idea of trying to stick to some kind of sense of history, but you know, I I'm notorious amongst myself for really preparing only the bare bones before a session starts, and there will be various kinds of little um, threads and things that I want to do, perhaps, but it's all open. And I do have these moments where I just think, oh shit, um, I don't know where I am or what is going on historically, but so what? So, you know.
How about the rest of the panels? Anybody had any players, concerned about not knowing enough about a time period to want to play in that time period?
I don't think any of the groups I play with are, I don't want to say not smart enough to worry about that, but maybe they're not. I love you guys, but maybe you're not smart enough to get that. So I don't think nothing like that has happened in my games where people were, worried about, I don't know about enough about the situation. But I kind of think if it came up, I would take the Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure approach. They would just show up and like, whoa, we're in the medieval times. All right, man. And just run with it. So I don't know. That's my thought. It hasn't happened to me.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear this doesn't seem to be a widespread problem. That's good. I've run into that myself in wanting to run time travel games. I proposed a Time Bandits game one time, and the group I was with at the time didn't want to do it because they were worried about not knowing enough about the history.
Sorry, just really quick. I think maybe one of the advantages of playing a time travel game as opposed to a historical game is precisely that time travel, a bit like Back to the Future or whatever, is going to start messing with received histories. That's all that popped in my head. Safer.
When I only tend to run one game. Sorry, go ahead, Andy. Go ahead.
I was just saying, for us, it hasn't been historical settings that have been the problems. It's been the notion of undertaking a time travel game. There's been hesitation about that, and finding solutions to that has sometimes been impossible, and sometimes just been a little bit of a push.
Right. Well, that'll bring us to our next question. But let's get safe. Let's Safer finish his thought, and we'll hop into that.
The only time I tried to run a game online was for Barney and Spencer, and I tried to run a League of Eternal Guardians game based on the Viking raid and Lindisfarne. And I'm just going to look it up again. 793, I think it was. Is it 793? Yeah, 793. So I was nervous about getting the dates right. And I was also nervous. I realized, I want to know what time of year this was at. I think it was meant to be June the 6th or June the 8th. So I was kind of giving myself all this anxiety before the game about getting the setting right before we got there. So I just knew how to describe the weather and things and what it would be like. And it was probably unnecessary, actually. I don't know. I doubt the other players would have cared or probably knew about those little things. But I did kind of a little bit overwhelm myself with thinking, I should know, who the abbot was and things in the monastery and things, and who the monastery was dedicated to and things. So I did a little bit of checking up before the game. I've trying to remember facts for a test. I forgot them all now. I remembered them just for the game, and then they all just disappeared out my head. But I did panic a bit myself. I don't know if players panic a bit. Sometimes I worry about sounding foolish about, especially for characterizations. I remember playing in a game by. It was one of our early Eldritch games. No, it was the game with Andy Goodman. and it was going to be set in the 1900s.
St. Michael's
England.
Mount.
Yeah, St. Michael's Mount. So I was genning up on things like makes of cigarette in case I wanted to order some from a shop and things like that. I was just trying to get a little bit of extra, you know what I mean? So I don't know. It might just be my personality that I kind of panic myself with stuff like that, but I'm not sure if it's common.
No, I think that is, especially for GMs, because I know in the past I've done that where I ran a Mythic Greek game where it's kind of recreated. It was more of a movie Greek game where you talk about like Jason or the Argonauts and Clash of the Titans and more of a Ray Harryhausen game, really. But I spent hours trying to figure out, well, what's the movement rate of the the ships if they're going up and down the coast and this and that, and which in the end it doesn't really matter for the game. It's you just move it by the speed of plot, but you worry about these things. So
perhaps it's just part of the GM's fun, isn't it? That's part of the GM's fun, isn't it? That's part of the world building of a GM's fun. But when it gets to the point of anxiety about it, then it becomes a bit of a problem, I think. But yeah,
and that's a big thing with the time travel games, because the anxiety, what system we're going to use, how realistic is it going to be. So I'm going to throw this one to Anthony. Anthony, system question. How to balance realistic, quote unquote, realistic time travel mechanics and playability.
A balance between finding the balance between the system for time travel and, I don't know, role playing time travelers.
Yeah, combination of, I think this is, again, more of a GM issue though, right? It's because the GM is the one that has to track anomalies and problems that the time travelers cause. So you want a system that is fun to play in, but is realistic enough to kind of feel real, depending what version of time travel you use, right? So
right, and that was hugely important in Safer's series, was talking about the different types of time travel that you could envision, and have you guys heard of the game Continuum?
Been a while.
Which I have
we
here.
have a couple nods and a couple no's. So
right.
Nice. I haven't seen that game in a while.
I'm not sure how popular it was, because I was over here when it was released, and I ordered it from Noble Knight because it struck me as interesting. And then when I started talking about it, people were like, "Oh my God, that game blew my mind," both in the good way of blowing your mind and in the bad way of blowing your mind. So, but I get a kick out of it because it asks that question, really, right? So if we sit down and think about running a time travel game, and we think that the game master is going to track everything, it will very quickly become unwieldy if the game is built around the idea of a lot of time travel, or if time travel is something that the player characters control, like they've got some kind of psionic power, or they've got some kind of portable equipment that allows for time travel, then they're going to time travel. They're in a time traveling game. They're going to do that. It's going to be a solution to their problems, which will be creating lots of things for the game master to track. So what Continuum does is have everybody track their own activities. The game master keeps an overall track of what's going on, but if you change something, if you alter something, if you do something important involving time travel, you make a note of it. And we start to build an idea of that character's, what the game calls the yet, which is not a clear thing, but what it means is the required future. All right, so I jumped back in time to give myself important information that I needed to know in an earlier period. So I have to remember to go back in time to tell myself that. And if I don't, if I'm prevented or delayed or stopped from doing that thing, then the game is going to hit me with game consequences. So I thought that was a lot of fun. But this game can't happen unless we use the type of future that Safer described as the collapsing one. Like everything comes back down to a zero line, right? So we don't have multiple threads. We don't have multiple universes. We have one timeline, and you're jumping around inside it, and you have to adhere to it or that timeline fragments, and that delivers negative consequence to the characters and those around them. So I like this because as its way to deliver the answer to your question is that it passes it out through the whole group. The game uses troop style play, right? So you play the you of the game's current now, and the game master or another player will play the future you or the past you or whatever as we go around. And so you always get to experience it from the point of view of the active participant. And you always get to experience both sides of any of these interactions. And everybody is tracking the things that happen. So it doesn't all fall on one person to remember all of time and all changes to time. So that would be my answer to the question: is troop style group buy-in on a very fundamental level about what it is we're undertaking.
Yep, Barney.
Hey, well, we come back to this topic of realism, which is always coming back up, isn't it? Like food that won't stay down. I don't care about realism, really. We're playing a game, and like you say, the speed of the ship doesn't matter. It's about the pace of the game, and that's not to say that people aren't invested or whatever, immersed even, but I don't think that doesn't have to be in the fictional setting. And I think so I would just strike realism out of that. But this question of setting, sorry, of system and the setting, I think is interesting because we can use time travel as in let's say a sequence of games as a way to hop through different time frames and locations, right? Without red lines or an aeroplane or whatever. It gives us that activity. But there are, I think, mechanical things as well that can be done. And Anthony, you're talking about that in your answer there, where you actually have time travel during a session or over a course of sessions. So I think there are questions around the mechanics of that, but also I think that can get finer. So in League of Eternal Guardians, characters can have different powers which actually have some kind of control over time and space in different kinds of ways. So they could be artifacts, it could be a slow time or a speed up time, kind of rewind time, manipulate space and time. So collapsing space between things. And there's always an interesting moment where people say, "Oh, if I'm collapsing space, is that a temporal thing? Or if I'm collapsing time, is that a spatial thing?" So it all just becomes a whole lot of fun. Working out and negotiating that with the players, and that's what I've also wanted to do with League of Eternal Guardians. And maybe Safer and Spencer would speak to that a little bit. But I think what I really wanted to do with the game as well is have some kind of a time travel possibility that doesn't require really any tracking by anybody. So it's just a mess of different events and multiple dimensions. And you can be existing on any one of those which intersect with another one, and none of it matters. It's totally knockabout.
I think that's the great pleasure of the game is the anything goes approach to League of Eternal Guardians, and the whole setup allows. I think it lends itself to online play particularly well, and not knowing who's going to turn up for what session as well. You can kind of incorporate all kinds of obstacles into the play. Yeah.
I think Barney's League of Eternal Guardians takes some influence from Sapphire and Steel, I think, in a way, because Sapphire and Steel offers an antidote to concerns about consistent time. It's like an antithetical position to what I was mulling over. I don't know if you're familiar with Sapphire and Steel and the premise of it. The TV show in the 70s and 80s.
Yeah, go ahead and give us a brief for the listeners, because I'm sure a lot of listeners aren't familiar with it.
Explain it.
A brief. Right. Okay.
Well, just the elevator pitch is fine. I mean, just
Oh no. Well, okay.
Yeah.
It's a sci-fi show about David McCallum and Joanna Lumley play two time protectors. They're not really time travelers. They're time protectors, and they are protecting the present from attacks on the present by entities of time and by time itself. The show has a complex presentation of time. Joanna Lumley actually describes it in one episode as a corridor leading from the past, the beginning of time, to the end. And the present is moving down this corridor. And along this corridor lives monsters that can interact with the present. Sometimes when they come across the present, they can move up and down time. They try to damage the present, they try to steal things from the present. And there's a bit of a mixed metaphor in that this corridor is described as being made from a fabric that, a bit like the Force, interweaves and surrounds everything. And that the fabric of time, literally they're described as a fabric of time, can wear thin in places. And time itself sometimes tries to burst into the present and damage the present and steal things from the present. So there's this sense of, to me, that's a mixed metaphor. I like to think of it as there's a sea of time, a chaotic sea of time. The present is a little bubble moving along a little current, that followed route. There's entities in that current. And these protectors are trying to protect this bubble of the present from the entities that exist in the current and the whole massive chaotic time that's threatened to impinge in on it. It's also got an allegorical theme of progress, that the idea that things from the past are bad and that you have to keep moving the present into the future. So the means by which these entities attack the present is old things, antiques, old buildings, even old memories and old feelings like nostalgia can be a threat. It's quite a dark series. It's meant to be sci-fi, but it presents itself more almost like a ghost story or a mystery story. It reminds me more of like the Signalman of Charles Dickens's books and things like that. So, and it's got elements of cosmic horror to it. It's all filmed on one set, so it's a very claustrophobic ghost story type feel. It's almost like the Poltergeist. But the thing with it is they're presented as investigators investigating these breaks in time, these threats to the present. But it's so crazy that none of it makes any sense, and they don't worry about it. It's not like a detective story where there's something to be deduced and worked out. It's just something fantastical. And the actors treat it as if it means something to them, but it's just presented to the audience without any deception or anything hidden. Because it's so weird, they know that you're never going to work it out. And all they do is they come up with solutions that seem to them logical. But to us, when you think about it, it's like, what? How does that work? And that's not important. It's not important that it's consistent or makes sense. All that's important is that it's dramatic and it's creative. So the very first episode, there's an entity that invades her old house in the attic, and it steals the parents of this family away and just leaves two children, a boy and a girl. And Sapphire and Steel arrive to investigate the place. And for some reason, they trap this entity in the attic, and then it sends out satellite entities from itself, little offshoots of itself that appear as little lights. It's really low budget. They're just little lights on the floor, and they go and hide behind wallpapers and paintings and things. And they try to attack Sapphire and Steel. But the end of it is that these offshoots go down to the basement and hide themselves in the founding stone of the building, where they try to lure the children into it and try to take the children back into the past to steal them from the present. And Steel comes to the conclusion that they've made a mistake and that he goes back into the past, and because he can make himself go down to almost zero temperature, he freezes himself. He gets the help of another investigator called Led, who's this huge black actor with a lovely, deep, resonant voice. I can't remember his name, like Darth Vader style voice. And he needs him for insulation, whatever that is. And he goes down and he goes into the past where they've stored these two children. And he freezes himself and he grabs the stone, he freezes the stone, and then Led grabs it and he smashes it. And that fixes the problem. That solves the problem that these entities are attacking the prison. And it's like, what? You're never going to work that out. It's just like, what's crazy? And the only thing that's important is that it's creative and it's dramatic, and therefore it's interesting to the audience. It doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. And that might be an antithetical approach to worries about consistency in time travel and problems. Just don't worry about it. And I'm sure this is what Barney likes to hear. Just make it creative and dramatic and appealing to the players, and let them have inputs like, I'm going to freeze myself down to. That's why League of Eternal Guardians lends itself to this, because it allows such creative, fantastical solutions to things. So that's one approach to it, but it might not be the approach if you're trying to create a historical game. If you're actually trying to create a historical game with timelines and you're trying to explore other concepts of time. But I think that's what Barney. Am I right, Barney? Is that right? Am I right in that assumption that you've taken a lot of influence from Sapphire and Steel?
Yeah, I mean, it's a load of things, isn't it? It's that there's a bit of quantum leap in there, and I think there's more Doctor Who than I would really care to mention. Really,
you do use quite a safe method of time travel, Barney, with the warp transporter, which I describe as the time bus. You just pick us up and you just drop us at the bus stop and then drive off, and we never see the bus again. And then we have our normal adventure, which is, well, not normal, it's normally crazy.
Well, there are all these different portals at headquarters, aren't there? Which are different portals are better suited to go to different times and places, so they kind of echo the time and location that you're going to. And there's infinite number of these portals, so they always get hurled through those. And a little thing that I've thrown in for a while now that I like is that I get the players to roll to see if the characters have travel sickness. And if they do, that just gives, knocks them a little bit at the beginning of the game. So they kind of come out at the beginning without having done anything, a little bit knocked back, possibly, not always, but yeah. So it's very safe. It's very safe for anybody. Anyone should try it.
No, it's a lot of fun. I know I enjoyed when I played, and my schedule hasn't allowed me to play very much with the league, but I did enjoy that. So I guess the other way to do this, if players want to have some kind of course, realistic is a bad word here, right? Because we're talking about time travel. But you do the Marvel approach, the infinite, where every timeline is its own separate thing. So if you hop, as soon as you do any change, I'm talking Marvel Comics more than Cinematic Universe, but as soon as you make a change, it's a new timeline. And that way you're not too worried about those changes. Or what a lot of games do, I know Time Lords does this and other games do, is where time is a river. And it really takes a lot to divert a river. So you can have changes in the timeline, and unless you do a major change, it's going to self-correct, which is kind of, Safer talked about this in answering the question from Rob or Minion from Professions We Timber Spooky podcast, where he asked,
what if they go back and kill Frodo?
That, probably things would still self-correct and the ring would eventually still find its way to Mount Doom.
Even without Frodo.
And that kind of thing where your minor changes aren't going to probably cause that butterfly effect, as opposed to, well, the butterfly effect, right? Which is a great story. Everybody should go read that. Check that out.
Sound of Thunder.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, Sound of Thunder. I apologize. That's
I was saying there was a butterfly effect as well, kind of based all off the same thing, and that was also fun. But I was
No, you're right. I was thinking of Sound of Thunder, 100%.
Bradbury.
Yeah, and so let me ask you this, Joe. What's your favorite implementation of time travel in games, or the favorite maybe idea around time travel in different games that you've seen?
I don't know if I would say I have a favorite. I think it depends on kind of the game, like what the story you're doing in the game is, what kind of the accepted sciences are. I mean, I know we are talking time travel and science only goes so far in that run. But like I think it kind of depends on where that is, because I think if you have more magic, that's going to have a very different spin on possibly the time travel or what that looks like or how that interacts with things. I think. I don't know. The most recent one I did was it was a sci-fi game, total science fiction game. It was a crew of reptoids. That was all my players. But that one was done with the split timelines. You know, that there was like multiverse kind of thing, and there was a whole deal with these other parallels being collapsed, and they ended up having to kind of jump through and run these parallels or parallel universes as everything was closing in. So, I mean, I don't know if it was per se so much time travel as it was experiencing different theoretical wins, I guess, if that makes sense. So it was definitely fun, and it was the right one, I guess, for the story or for the game that we were playing. But I think that only became infinitely cooler because of the players I had, and they just, I mean, like I know Barney, you'd mentioned like that buy-in, or I think Anthony, one of you guys, I'm working everybody's names, putting them all in, but one of you guys had mentioned like that buy-in, and I had players that really like bought into it and, you know, just helped push that narrative. I mean, it was awesome. So I think that's my current favorite, but that's not like a locked in choice. Like I think it definitely could change depending on story, on where my favorite actually lies for mode of, or how that time travel looks.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think player buy-in is huge in a game like this, because they have to either take you have to take the game in the spirit it's meant to be. So if it's League of Eternal Guardians, they need to have that free-willing idea that, you know, I'm not worried about this. We're just going to have fun. We're going to do this. And players should have fun anyway. But if you're playing a more serious game, that, you know, because there are more quote unquote serious time travel games out there, if the players go into that as Bill and Ted, or they go into that with not worrying about consequences, you know, I'm going to go, you know, shoot the president. Then now I'm just going to go kill Hitler. I'm not going to do the mission. Then you can derail. Although that can be fun or interesting, but you can totally derail a session really quickly if a player doesn't have the buy-in on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, if everybody's thinking time bandits and you show up as, you know, Michael J. Fox or Marty McFly, there's a disparity there. That's true.
Right.
You guys familiar with Luther Arkwright?
Yes. We're getting a number of nods here.
Vaguely.
Yeah. So that was a game I was lucky enough to work on, but it does time travel without doing time travel. So it's an endless series of parallel universes, and the differences between the parallels are expressed by historical variation, right? So rather than like walking into a place with talking trees or whatever, it's a period where the British Empire never fell or never rose or whatever. You know, so it can seem like you're jumping through time when they're actually not, you know, which is another way to handle the time travel thing without having to worry too much about the mess the mess that you make. And
Anthony, was that
sorry, go ahead.
There are two versions of the Arkwright game, aren't there? Like there's a first. Yes. Were you on the second one?
On the second one from Design Mechanism, yeah, for Mithras. Yeah.
I think the multi-universe is going to be the natural fit for role-playing games as a medium. Really having a contrived plot line like in movies and books, because we don't know what's happening, because role-playing games are a developing medium. The dynamic in the moment, you can't really have the situation that I was discussing with Spencer, where, say, we have a fight with a load of orcs in one dungeon room, and then we go into the next room, we discover a time travel device, travel back in time, walk back into the room, and find ourselves in the middle of the original orc fight. Spencer was arguing that, well, shouldn't we have seen ourselves walk back into the room in the original fight? And you can do that in a book and a movie, but you can't do that in a role-playing game. I just don't think it's a medium that can allow that sort of thing.
Of course you could.
Oh, I can't think of it.
That's not a problem.
Go on then, Bonnie.
Well, you just go back in time and then you see yourselves go in as NPCs. That's it.
No, but you can't know that.
Yes,
until
but
you do it, you can't know that that's going to happen yet. So the original fight scene with the orcs, you will just have the fight with the orc. Then you'll go into the next room, do the time travel, come back. Spencer's argument was, should we have seen ourselves when we were originally doing the original fight?
future selves, yeah.
Our future
Right.
selves walk back into the room.
That-
You can't. I don't think you can do that in a role play.
No, but then there's that's the kind of Scrooge visitation thing, isn't it? You know, that's time travel, but you're ethereal. You're a third. You know, you're watching it.
Well, very interesting. So if I can get everybody to hold that thought just for a second, Barney has to hop off here. Before Barney leaves, we are going to get back to that question because that's a great question, Safer. But I want to ask Barney one final question before he goes and give him a chance to plug anything he wants to plug. So Barney, your final question: recommend one piece of homework for a GM interested in running a time travel game. What would you recommend they check out to get themselves in the right mind frame?
Okay, I am going to recommend Zardoz. I think there's lots of problems with it, especially if you like the relationship between men and women in that particular film. But I think it has a good go at presenting you with something coherent that you can't explain and that goes in all kinds of different directions and places and levels. And I think the key thing is as well that John Borman, with that floating head at the beginning, it's totally designed to be a film. You know, the joke is it's a film. He's got a painted on mustache. That's not a budgetary constraint. You know, that's a kind of possibly an in joke, but definitely this idea that it's a constructed, playful thing. That would be my suggestion.
That's a great suggestion.
Thank you all very much. It's lovely to meet you, Joe and Anthony, and Safer and Spencer and Jason. Well, see you all again, I hope. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing the rest of what you all say.
Excellent. Thank you. Is there anything you want to plug before you leave, Barney?
No, because we've talked enough about League of Eternal Guardians, so I'll just bow out and let you get on with it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for joining us, Barney. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
So let's get back to this question because this is interesting, and this actually feeds into the question I've got written down for Spencer. So let me ask Spencer his question, and we'll get right back in this discussion about seeing, should you have seen yourself fight? The question I wrote down for Spencer is an adventure design question, and the trap of wanting to recreate movies in time travel books. So, and I think this feeds right into it because in the movie, because you're scripting it out, you would have the forethought to do that. But as Safer said, in a game, you're not going to know you're not going to know what they do until they do it. So how do you do that? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's a tough one, isn't it? It's funny. It brought to mind. I was thinking earlier when you were talking about consistency and the struggle to divert the flow of time. I was just watching Time After Time, the movie about H.G. Wells pursuing Jack the Ripper across 1970s San Francisco, which is just all kinds of pulp, wonderful ideas mashed together. And there's a bit in that where he's trying to convince Mary Sternbergen that he's from the past, and he takes her to the machine, and then they travel a few days into the future, and the first thing that happens when they emerge from the machine is she picks up a newspaper and it says she's been murdered. And the first thing H.G. Wells says is, we have to go back. And the first thing I thought was, that's the last thing you want to do. Because you just skipped it. You just avoided being murdered, surely. It throws up all kinds of issues, which is why it's why I like the Eternal Guardians approach that kind of almost like the Time Bandits. You're going back and doing things that ultimately are of kind of little consequence. Or rather, you're undoing anomalies. You're resetting things to how they should be. And I think that's the key, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. So so we see two main kind of time travel games, or at least the ones I've read, and I have not read all of them by any means. But you either have the time cop approach, which where you're fixing anomalies, right? Or you have the free flowing, like Time Lords, where you find the matrix. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Time Lords game. It was a BRTC game, or I guess still is. They've redone it for their. It used to be their old system, and now it's been redone for thank you. But in that game, the character, which the great thing about that game, at least the original, I'm only familiar with the original version, is your characters are just avatars of you. So they have rules for making yourself as a character, and like how strong you are, or how brave you are, or how smart you are. And like the other players kind of vote with you to decide your attributes and things like that. And, but basically you find a time travel device and poof, you're in time and you're trying to deal with that. So you either have the inadvertent time traveler, trying to deal with it, almost like Sliders, the TV show Sliders, where you're trying to get home, or you have Time Cops. And Time Cops definitely is the easier game because for the GM at least, because it's really a focus game where you're just running around fixing anomalies, right?
Yeah. Oh, like the Arkwright approach, where you're going into parallel universes and essentially, what you can do anything there which is not going to affect other timelines.
Right. Definitely. And any other thoughts from anybody on that? The idea of do we, the danger of trying to recreate fiction in the game, or ways around that?
I think some of the ways are easier than others. Like what you would describe, Safer, with the fighting the orcs in the room, stepping into the next room, time traveling, and then coming back to the same room. Like, that's the harder one to do, because when they're having that original fight, there's no way you're going to know that their future selves are walking back in. Like, that's a really tough one. But I know I've mentioned Bill and Ted once already. But in that movie, there's a bit of the future play where they're like, oh, well, all I have to do is, after we get out of here, I just have to hide the keys behind this billboard. And he walks over and dunk, and here's the keys. Oh, don't forget to hide those keys. Oh yeah. Like, that's a bit that, like, I think
I was just going to mention, Joe, after what Anthony said about the continuum being like a memory element to the game. I think as an approach, as a gaming approach, as a memory game, time travel games might work like Bill and Ted, where you have to remember what happened before to get things right. So it becomes like a memory puzzle game. I remember when I was a kid, I wanted to create a backward dungeon where the adventurers were sent with an artifact to a shrine somewhere in some dungeon way off. And when they got there, they found it was completely, there was just dead bodies everywhere. Everything was done in. There was dead bodies everywhere. There was chests looted. There was secret doors opened and everything. All the traps were sprung. And they'd get to the end of the final room, put the artifact back on the shrine where it was meant to be to purify the shrine. And then they would suddenly see flashing lights, and the torches would suddenly light back up, and then they would look around and they would see all the dead bodies suddenly stand up, and then boom, next thing they've gone into the past, and they're there in the middle, right at the end of the adventure, at the end of the dungeon, with everybody going, "Who the hell are you? Where have you come from?" And then they've got to fight their way out of the dungeon, and they've got to remember where everything was that they'd previously seen. Right. So they had to remember where all the secret doors were, and where all the loot chests were, and where the traps were. So it becomes a memory game, like a puzzle game. I always wanted to play that as a kid. I never got around to doing it. But yeah, so I think the memory game could be a way of playing, like the Bill and Ted memory game could be a way of using time travel in a game. I think that's an interesting possibility.
And Continuum does set you up to do that too. Like if you're in a situation you can't get out of, the characters are empowered in and of themselves to move in space and time. It's totally legitimate for them to, to spend a point of the currency of the game, frag, it's called, from fragmentation. They can do that to set up, well, the keys are behind the billboard or whatever, right?
Yeah.
But they're just delaying the cost, right? They do have to come back and put the keys behind the billboard or there's problems. So it feeds into the role play itself. Like the game becomes about the things you've done. Right. And so it's a very personal, or it can be a very personal game, but it's set up like Jason was talking about as, protecting the timeline and making sure that things go well for our time traveling society, that kind of thing. But that jumping back into the room to find yourselves when you didn't experience yourselves thing, I think this encourages people to make a lot of rules, right? Mm-hmm. Like you cannot be next to yourself in a timeline. It just won't work, or you just die, or there's some kind of things which create an awful lot of rules for time travel, or exceptions or limitations, which I think may or may not take fun out of it. Like it may be really exciting and cool, but it might also be less fun. So the freewheeling thing that we were talking about with Barney is not that. It's like the opposite of that. And Arkwright avoids that altogether by putting you in different timelines. But Continuum tried to walk a different line by giving you a set of rules, social rules about treating people, right? So if you meet the older you, this is what you need to do. And if you meet the younger you, this is what you need to do. And if you meet someone who has witnessed a time travel event, this is what you need to do. And it's on the very first page of the book. You open up the cover of the book and that's what you see. And at the bottom it says, memorize this, right? You may be asked to repeat it verbatim. And the whole game is really about doing this kind of stuff. It's kind of,
I think that's the thing about time travel. It's so big. It's got so much potential. It can be used across many different, not just genres of role playing, but different styles of role playing, like the memory game, like the freewheel and anything goes crazy game, like the historical game. It's got so much potential. And I think that was all I was just trying to say in the podcast, just trying to encourage people to perhaps think about utilizing it and just ponder some of the, I don't know, perhaps as a GM, we're a bit of a masochist. We like to think these things through, don't we? We like to ponder rules and worlds, and we can get carried away with it. And half of it, I never get seen by the players. It's just our game as GMs, I think. But I think just having a little ponder of it can be fun as a GM, and just consider some of the potentials, like Anthony suggested there, and like Joe, different versions of the game, different genres. That's what I was trying to promote, really.
Yeah, no, that's...
Well, how have people used it?
Well, let's. Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Oh no, I was just going to go into another drone on.
No, that's fine.
Yep.
Yeah, that's the point we're at now.
Right.
How have you used time travel?
Well, I mean, not one that I have used it.
Okay.
Actually, wait, no, you know what? I did do one. I wrote some of the or the final like boss rooms for a campaign, The Age of Snakes, for Index Card RPG. I did have a time travel room in that. It took place as part of the temple. It was, like the main run up towards the altar and sarcophagi and everything, but it was just horribly, it was all rotted out. I probably should just grab the book so I don't misquote myself. But the way it was set up was that you could not get through this encounter in just the one present, because the whole place was dilapidated and ruined. So you had to navigate by jumping to the past, and the mechanisms were there in the room, but going into the past to navigate part of the room so that when you jumped back into the future, all of a sudden you were where you needed to be. I guess if that makes sense. Because just with the ruination of the room, you couldn't just get from point A to point B. You had to
That's cool.
Go to when the stuff was there, or when the place was rebuilt to pass through, and for the thing you needed to actually be there, because in the future it wasn't. And those cool things. So I guess I did kind of do that. I almost forgot about that. But I think the original thing I wanted to bring up was the Saber, you mentioned the game you always wanted to run with time travel. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, I guess a little more recent, Boss Level. So it's kind of video game style. You play, like, the guy comes through and it starts like in the middle. It says like, attempt 40 something. And so he lives through it. He gets up and he just kind of like ducks his head out of the way. His like knife blade comes through and he's like putting on his shoes and he's like, yep, this is my morning now. And then he ducks as like the knife blade comes the other way and he fills his coffee. And then he stands there. He's like, wait, did I forget the helicopter? And he gets shot up and killed and then wakes back up in the same spot. And so that kind of parallels that memory game.
Yeah.
Where you have to remember. And I think that would be a fun twist on time travel to actually play through. But I think getting it to work in a game would be a little bit tricky. You'd have to hand wave and be like, all right, so we've got that. We're just going to start this run in the next room, or kind of a thing. But I think that's a game I definitely would like to attempt. Is players are going to die a lot. And I think they should be upfront and realize that you're going to die just trying to get it through. I don't know. It's
we're coming back though. That's the thing. We're coming back.
Right. You come back. So it's your Edge of Tomorrow, or your, all these movies, your Groundhog Day kind of thing. But I think I think the important, or one important thing from that, you mentioned you wrote that adventure for ICRPG, right? Yep. We don't have to use a time travel role-playing game to do time travel adventures.
It's true.
Any game can support this. You don't necessarily even need game mechanics per se, as long to implement this stuff. I mean, you might have specific things for that scenario, but if you have a favorite system, if your favorite system listener is 5e, or if your favorite system is Savage World or whatever it is, you can run time travel games in that, or do time travel game in that without doing, or adventures in that without switching systems.
I've done way more time travel in Star Trek Adventures than at any other point in my gaming life, because it's Star Trek, and of course there's going to be time travel, and I'm not the biggest fan of time travel stories, but there's just something about it, and that brings it out of me in Star Trek, and it's weird, but there's a side tangent to time travel, which is when you, the game master, are playing with the presentation of events. It's got nothing to do with time travel, but the players experience the events out of sync with time. Which is time travel narratively, but the perception of the characters. Is that something that you have played around with?
I've been in games that do that. So it's that thing where you start at a point and then you rewind, right? So it's like, okay, you're on the room of the
24 hours earlier.
Yeah, exactly. 24 hours earlier, and then you run the adventure from there forward. I've been in games that have done that. But although that's
Blades in the Dark, not
what's that?
Sorry, I was just wondering. I'm not familiar with Blades in the Dark, but my understanding is that there are similar things, like when you're planning a heist, you're referring back to earlier all the time.
There, it's a flashback. Events. Yeah. So you're not experiencing it up front in the same way, but you are messing with the flow of time. Absolutely.
Right. We've done it with Wise Guys, which is a Savage World setting by Eric Lamoureux, where you're playing like 90s gangsters, or it's like Wise Guys, right, or Casino, and but in that, because you're doing heists, so it's it's like any heist movie where you've got to be able to rewind to see how you set the heist up. Right. So,
but I'll pose this to you as a question. Imagine that you're starting out like a Star Trek episode where something dramatic is happening on the main viewer. Everybody's in the bridge. The dramatic music is playing. The klaxons are going off, and the say Romula plasma weapon is coming up on the screen, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and then you cut back to an earlier point in time and say, okay, here we go. You're entering the solar system, and the players are going, what? Where's the Romulans? Like, what Romulan? There's no Romulan.
Right.
How would you approach getting play back to the point where that actually happens?
I mean,
Or no, go
sorry, go
Joe,
ahead.
go. Well, I was gonna add without it feeling like a horrible railroad, right? That's the
Right, exactly.
I was going to mention
Where
the
everything,
same thing. Like at some point, it's going to have to railroad.
but you can kind of have a guided adventure without it feeling that way. I mean, the players will look back on it and say, oh, "I see what he did," or "I see what what she did, what the GM did." But it's tough.
Yeah, because I mean, definitely at some point, just to get to that moment where you started the players, if that is the ultimate end game, if there is no avoiding that, like at some point you are going to have to be like, all right, it's this isn't Indiana Jones, but get in the mine car, we're following the track, like that's where we got to go. But I mean, if you didn't necessarily need to come back to that point where they're all on the bridge with the Romulan attack, you could easily just let your players run and follow where they're going to go because they know what the end result is going to be if they stay the same course. So it's kind of like, you guys get a chance to avoid that collision where you're all potentially going to die. And now how does this change when the Romulans attack? So, I mean, you could still have that Romulan attack and leave it open. But if you wanted that same moment, you'd have to railroad.
Yeah, sorry, Joe. Yeah. So, you could have it where the players know that's coming up, so the game can become trying to avoid that situation. Mm-hmm. Or the GM could surprise them and say, the screen comes up and there's a Klingon attack ship. It's that loop assist. It's that looper method of time travel where things change for you. You go back in the past, but then you change and you find your future change and you changed as well. So it is extra timelines. I think, trying to maintain a fixed time continuum, trying to maintain a single timeline is always going to be hard in a role-playing game. And I think it's invariably going to lead to accusations of railroading. So I think that multiple timeline route is probably, most games are going to naturally fall into that, I think, without the players are going to take it there as well, Joe. Yeah, so.
An interesting
quantum ogre.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, the quantum ogre, definitely. I was going to say the other thing that's interesting, it's not exactly time travel, but related is, how do you do precognition in a role-playing game, right? Or how do you do, seeing the future, that kind of thing? Or do like your Sherlock Holmes from your, the recent Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes movie, where, he kind of sees everything in his head, his course of action. And which you could definitely play it that way, where you play, you give the player that power effectively to rewind time, right? So you can rewind. You have the power to rewind 5 rounds or whatever, and that way they can try to reset and try to do it again. But
or they can just narrate a sequence of the combat. But that it's going to be satisfying one way for some people and satisfying another way. We're not all wired the same way.
Right.
But
I think that's why it's worthwhile having time travel limited, taking that leaf out of movie and novels, books, to limit the time travel, to not have it too extensive that it just gets beyond. Because if it gets too out of hand, it is going to become ludicrous. You're going to end up in the knockabout game. Naturally, that's your that's your convergent universe. That's the baseline universe Anthony was talking about. The baseline universe is a bargain bin knockabout game, and it's going to get ridiculous if it gets out of hand. So I think setting some limitations to the time travel is perhaps worthwhile doing as a GM beforehand.
Talking about the premonition thing, I think that occurred in a recent episode of a recent session of League of Guardians that we were playing in, where my character had a premonition of a few moments into the future, which meant that for the next few rounds, I was doing everything with advantage because I could anticipate what was about to happen. And, that was a good way, I think, of limiting the extent of that.
Right. You could also do something where you could, you automatically get to avoid an attack because because you had a premonition. So now, just sometime in this game, you can choose what attack to avoid, right? Where no matter what it is, because you had that foresight, maybe do it that way. I don't know. Go ahead, Anthony.
No, but I'm right there with you. Like there's so many different ways to handle, and that way of giving advantage or giving a pass to an attack keeps the overhead, the mental overhead, so much lower, right? I mean, there are players who don't like having the get out of jail free card, right? They don't want to have to hold it in their hand and think about which attack am I going to miss? Should I miss this one? Should I miss the next one? What if I use it too soon? That's takes people out of the game or gives stress. But there's lots of people who would kill to have that card. So, I don't know, but I like it nice and simple like that. But
well, that's the key. We can come up with all kinds of complex mechanics, but really we want our game mechanics to get out of the way so we can play the game. The best games aren't the ones where we're sitting there with a calculator figuring out how this during the game.
Oh man, I'm having flashbacks of Cinnabar.
There you go. Yeah,
the calculator.
That's right. You start with 6,000 hit points, and you do. But
Spencer, I don't know if you remember, but you used that premonition skill on me in the game that I tried to run. I don't know if you remember it. It wasn't a very good game. It was quite a while ago. And it was at a point where I knew there was pretty much a 50-50 outcome. They were either going to stop these people or they weren't. And so I knew which general direction the game was going to go in. And I also had some ideas of possible things that might happen. So in Spencer's premonition, I just presented all of these things. I didn't present them as this is the definite timeline. I gave him like a flash of the possible multi-timelines that he could go down, depending on, but I didn't tell him which timeline was which or how. It wasn't obvious what he was seeing was the result of any particular action he was going to take. It was just something that I'd thought about beforehand, and I thought, well, yeah, this basically whether they help these people or they attack these people or they do nothing, the outcome is going to be either these people are going to succeed or they're not going to succeed. So I know I've got a 50-50 choice. And then I just added other elements I think might happen. So I presented them as like him seeing the multi-universe in a way that might happen to him. If things happened differently, I wouldn't have tried to railroad him into one of the other premonitions, but I perhaps would have quantum ogred one of the things into the thing. But I don't know how you felt about that, Spencer, if you can even remember it. But that's how I did. I just presented the options.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
The only thing that was wrong with that game is we never got to finish it.
Oh, sorry, Spencer. Yeah, I caught COVID, didn't I, just before Christmas? Yeah, so perhaps one day when we're retired.
That's right. We need that
to remember those premonitions.
That's right. We need that retiree home of RPGers so we can all play in our retirement. I think if you don't want to do the Gonzo all crazy thing, another easy way to do all this and a time travel game, and this is hoping you hear this before you hear Safer's latest episode, but you may not. In Safer's latest episode, he answers questions. We talk about Trancers, and Trancers is a guilty pleasure of mine. It's a B movie, but in Trancers, the way they do time travel is you time travel. Your consciousness goes back to the body of your ancestors or people in your family line. That's how you time travel backwards. The genetic memory kind of thing. And the advantage of that is you really can't screw time up very much by doing that, or not for yourself, because if you die, then it's done.
Problem solved.
Yeah, problem solved. I mean, you can change the future by doing something like that, but you don't have to worry about meeting yourself or have you been here before or any of those kind of. I don't know. Safer, I'm sure, is going to throw in a curveball how it could be a problem. But
actually, as I was saying about this time travel overlaps, I think, with a lot of other genres and ideas. I think there's a lot of things that come into this other multi-universe, and time travel touches on a lot of things. And one of them, this genetic memory idea, I think that could be the premise of a game where you could almost be playing in a simulation. You can be knowingly playing in a simulation of someone else's memories. It's a bit like, what's that film? There's a film with a guy, he's got to investigate the results of a train crash. What's that one?
Oh,
Source Code.
Source Code, yeah, that's it. Where he actually goes back into the mind of a guy who's on the train and he's trying to piece together what happens on the train. So he's like in a vat of something. So with that concept of time travel where you're just in a simulation of a world and you're reliving it. So there's no worries about breaking the future because it's all a simulation anyway. I think that would be a route of Yeah, go ahead, Spencer.
I was just going to say, isn't that a kind of Assassin's Creed? Isn't that the premise?
Yeah, Assassin's Creed does that.
Assassin's
You
Creed.
actually you go into the Animus. Yeah. So it's all a simulation of your ancestors' memories, and then you can play around in that world. So it's
like re-exploring the past as opposed to physically changing or altering the past.
Yeah. You're actually playing in a simulated world in itself. That could be a way of doing it.
Yeah, and I think that kind of still, like, I mean, obviously it's still in that time travel theme, but I think it's a pretty accurate, way to represent time travel in a game as well. If you wanted to skip, all of the what ifs of what if they do this thing in the past and now our campaign is ruined in the future or the present, or like without the bookkeeping going into, like said there, a constructed reality or so. That could be a fun way to do it.
Yep, definitely.
Get rid of the bookkeeping.
And I think that's an important thing, because you want to have as low a load as possible as the game master as you're doing this, right? Which is the advantage of Continuum, which is why we're all going to rush to Noble Knight to try to pick up any copies, or eBay, right, to get copies of it now. But let me ask you all this. I'm going to ask everybody our time's winding down here, and so let me ask you the question I asked Barney. What if you could recommend one piece of media? It could be a RPG, a book, a music video. It doesn't matter. But one thing for a potential game master who's going to run a time travel game of some sort. What inspirational media or something to think about? What would you like? And we'll wait a second, see if somebody's ready. If not, I'll pick on somebody. Oh, Anthony's ready.
There was a television series, an American television series called Journeyman. It was unfortunately destroyed, canceled, erased from history by the writer's strike of forever ago. But it put time travel, like biological time travel, the individuals could travel through time, but they weren't really in control of it. Or at least it didn't seem that way. And they went back in time for an amount of time. Right. And it's, as it went through its limited run of episodes, that you slowly got to see a little bit more and a little bit more of the time travelers' culture. It wasn't just the one guy. There were other people who were traveling, and they were coming back to different periods, and there were things you could change and things that you couldn't change. And I think if you're planning on doing a time traveling campaign about time travelers who can choose or not choose to time travel, it helps you ask the right questions about being the game master of such a thing, or being a player in such a thing. The questions that are going to be faced, like, what clothes should I wear to blend in 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 50 years ago? And how about money? How do I solve that problem of money and ID? And, it's interesting. So Journeyman is what I would recommend if you can find it.
Ooh, excellent. A quest. Love quests. Spencer.
It's what's interesting. I'm a big fan of time travel movies, but I think my favorite films are the ones that would be the least satisfying as RPGs. So the ones where the protagonists are robbed of their agency, and they're kind of like your 12 Monkeys thing. It doesn't matter what you tries to do, things are always going to play out a certain way. So I guess what I would suggest is maybe Looper, which Safer mentioned a little while ago, in that you can change things, and the entire universe is changed in that moment. So the everything that's happened is up for grabs, and the universe reshapes itself around the events in the current time that you're in. So I'd be interesting to see how you could work something like that.
Okay, Joe.
Looper was definitely great. That's a good one. Like you were saying, the immediate consequence of actions that have happened is pretty wild. But no, I was going to say, I guess for media, like, I mean, there's a lot, and it really depends on tone. But I think if you're looking for like, potentially, despite the campiness of the show, if you're looking for something potentially a little more on like that, I guess, science side of science fiction, the American show Travelers, which has people from the future trying to save their future. And of course, it goes into like there's different factions in the future working on things, but they kind of send the consciousness of people into the past, which is our present, era Earth. And these consciousness, it's like sent into the body of somebody who just died. So as somebody dies, boom, they're downloading their consciousness in so that they're not affecting that person's timeline because their timeline ended. So they take the body basically, and then they're working to reshape the future to help whatever problems they're suffering, 100 years into the present of themselves. So it's like, it's an interesting twist on that time travel where they're purposely trying to affect things, but you don't actually know what they're working to affect because we're in our present. And so they've got some other agenda. They're in contact with like their superiors telling them, we need you to go to, and this is why it would work great for a role-playing game. The messages are like, we need you to go to like the corner of such and such street in this town, and there's a man that's going to get on a bus and you need to stop him from getting on that bus. The future depends on it. So you've got these mission-oriented goals already, the nature of a serial television show. But it's got a cool little approach where it's, more of a cerebral time travel as opposed to them physically going back in time. But I would pick that for media.
Excellent. And we'll end where we started with Safer. What homework would you recommend, Safer?
Well, I've already mentioned it, Sapphire and Steel. Mm-hmm. I think that as an antithetical approach, that way you don't have to worry about making sense. You just have to make things dramatic and creative. As a model of using that, I think that might work for one shots better than campaign games. I think if you're playing a long-running time travel game, you may have to establish some rules about it. And strangely enough, I think long-running time travel games may be less creative. They may be more restrictive. So perhaps, like Stargate. Stargate is not a time travel game, but it dumps you somewhere fantastical, somewhere far, far away. And that's no difference to what any other time travel. That's what the time travel tunnel does. So that's the safest way of doing it. I think something like the time tunnel or Stargate, where if you want a long running game, just dump your players somewhere far, far away, let them have an adventure, and then come back, which is the cheapest, the easiest, and the most reliable method of running the game, but the least imaginative, I think. But if you want the opposite of that, you want the most imaginative use of time, I would recommend looking out Sapphire and Steel.
Excellent.
Just anything goes.
Yeah, and actually, we'll do a separate panel on dimensional games, sliders, and things. These dimension hopping games, and we'll see if you guys want to come back. And I know Anthony has done these kind of things where people have switched and reality has switched, and he's done different tricks. I won't give them away here, but but to give folks advice on how to do a sliders or all, where you're jumping between alternate futures kind of game or alternate history kind of game. So that'll be a separate panel. Thank you so much to everybody for coming on. I really appreciate it. We'll go around. Safer, do you have anything you want to plug?
No, no. I just make the odd podcast once in a while when I get bored and I get the energy to make one. I don't really know. I'm not really in control. I'm not the master of my own destiny. But my podcast just come out when the gods of time decide it's going to happen. So I haven't got anything to plug. But it's been a pleasure to be here. It's been a delight speaking to you as well. Thank you very much.
Oh no, thank you for kicking all this off, Spencer.
Just you can come and check out Keep Off the Borderlands if you like. It's not been as regular recently as I would like it to be, but other than that, just thanks for inviting me on the Cerebrivore.
Oh, definitely. Joe, anything to plug?
I'm terrible at marketing, so not really. Thanks much for awesome conversation. Great to have this great chat here in the morning with everybody around the globe. That's always, it's a fun treat. I got nothing. I don't plug anything.
Okay. Well, I'll put a link to your at least your Drive Through RPG page.
Oh, right.
With
I wrote some
your games.
adventures and stuff and a couple books. There we go. Thanks.
There we go. Anthony, plugs.
I'm usually years ahead of what I'm allowed to talk about. That's the great joy and great pain of being on the editing side of the desk, is not being able to talk about stuff. But in our future, when we travel there, we'll have some great conversations about stuff I'm looking at today. But anyway, I did really enjoy being a part of the conversation, traveling through time to be back with you all on your Tuesday morning for my Tuesday evening.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And, we'll talk to you all again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
A Nerd Central broadcast, Cerebral podcast. Let's savor all the flavors from the simulcast. All stars and pods past, Cerebral podcast. You're counting down your last as you admire them all. Something's playing teeth, or escaping the brain. What I mean is this machine's a freak, and from what I understand, that's don't look now, the Cerebral is coming, and all that's left is the trial and the running. You can bring the new I don't think above in any order, just another ring of legal causes running for the border. Just a snap.